George Bush declared negotiating with Stalin was wrong. The infamous paleoconservative George Bush senior advisor, not George W. Bush, Pat Buchanan, wrote a book called Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War. I wanted to read and take notes on it for videos because I heard anarcho capitalist podcaster Dave Smith recommend it. The book was also mentioned by the infamous Shit Disturber podcast historian, but not a Holocaust revisionist, Daryl Cooper. He infamously made the case for Hitler having better intentions than many of us believe, and that Churchill was the chief villain of World War II. This message was spread to millions of people on wacko conservative former Fox News journalist Tucker Carlson's podcast. In my last video on this book, I talked about the part in which Buchanan highly praised what British colonialism did for African countries. This means that even if Buchanan is against World War II, which is admirable, he's definitely fucking not anti war. It's undeniably the case that even more millions of people were slaughtered in mass genocide under British colonialism than in World War II. Anyway, in Churchill, Hitler, and the Unnecessary War, Buchanan wrote about former American President George Bush Sr. visiting Moscow, Russia for the 60th anniversary of VE Day. This is an acronym for Victory in Europe Day, which was the day when Germany under Hitler surrendered to the Allies, ending World War II, or at least mostly. On Bush's way to Moscow, he stopped in Latvia for a speech, which is where they don't celebrate VE Day. This is somewhat understandable, though, for them and other former Russian states or Soviet states, though, because the day after VE Day was when the Soviets first occupied these states in 1945 and these countries. Bush said that VE Day ended fascism, but it didn't stop oppression. He's right about that last part, but I would argue that the surrender of the Axis didn't end fascism either. He also said that the Yalta Conference between FDR, Churchill, and Stalin, quote, will be remembered as one of the greatest wrongs of history, unquote. Obviously, Churchill was the British Prime Minister during most of the World War II. FDR was the long reigning American president, and Stalin was the tyrannical slash genocidal leader of what was then the Soviet Union. To Bush, Yalta was a sellout of free nations as shameful as Munich. So during the Yalta Conference, Stalin, Churchill, and FDR negotiated the Soviet Union entering the side of the Allies in the war in exchange for letting them take over a whole bunch of other countries to make them part of the USSR. This included Latvia, Manchuria, and many others. The Munich Agreement was in 1938. Neville Chamberlain, who was the British Prime Minister before Churchill, got a deal with Italy and France that Hitler can have all of Czechoslovakia in exchange for Germany demanding no more land in Europe. Hitler clearly lied about this since he still tried to conquer all of fucking Europe. So, Bush is comparing the Yalta Conference to the Munich Agreement. The Munich Agreement ended up doing nothing more than serve Czechoslovakia up to the Nazis on a silver platter. Yalta is a little different, in my opinion, though. Russia joining the Allies after Hitler betrayed them and pushed them out of the Axis, basically, arguably led to VE Day, if not the very end of World War II. More Russian soldiers died than those from any other country. Also, many people don't know that attacking Stalingrad in the Soviet Union during the winter may have been Germany's biggest mistake. Hitler was a student of history, but he didn't learn from Napoleon's infamous failed attack on Russia in the winter. However, the Yalta Conference did massively expand the Soviet Empire and was an enormously major contributing factor to the Cold War. But the Axis would the Axis have been defeated if the USSR hadn't joined the Allies? I doubt it. That's debatable among historians. This highlights the moral aspects of war. Is it right or wrong to let a genocidal villain take territory if they join without protest, if they join your side and prevent it from losing the war. How do you measure the mass genocide of Stalin's regime against what the world would have been like if the Axis had won the war? You have to go and read the famous classic science fiction author Philip K. Dick's book, The Men in the High Castle, if you want to know the answer to that question. Was negotiating with Stalin wrong? I think that it was, but it led to a better outcome. So it wasn't. It may have been wrong, but it wasn't a mistake. The most important point to me, though, is this: while Bush is right about Stalin's evil, even if a Nazi global takeover had been avoided, that still doesn't make Bush anti-war. Let's get into some of the conflicts while he was in office. He did negotiate the end of the Cold War with Gorbachev, and that is sure as fuck not to be discounted. But he was still a bloodthirsty warmonger. He invaded Panama, started the Gulf War and the first Iraq War. He also massively escalated the Cold War before ending it. America gave weapons to the Taliban, had the CIA train them, and fought with them against the Russians. They taught them like fighting tactics too. The Taliban at the time included Osama bin Laden, which a lot of people know, who was, of course, the ringleader of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Anyway, Bush is right about the Yalta Conference being awful for the countries that Russia took over. However, well, no one can possibly know what the alternative result of World War II could have been. It almost certainly would have been a hell of a lot worse if the Soviets had not joined the Allies. That still doesn't excuse the Yalta Conference, but giving Hitler Czechoslovakia during the Munich Conference did less damage than letting Stalin conquer multiple countries with no resistance. Was negotiating with Stalin a mistake? Either way, Bush Sr. was sure as fuck not anti war.